It's, looks like we're up and running now. Can you see it?
Yep.
All right.
I'm looking at you.
All right. I didn't get camera ready, so a little greasy, a little natural glow. Are you through the laptop? Can you hear me?
I'm watching you through the laptop right now.
Got sound?
I can hear you. And it says it's been paused. There we go. Yeah, it's probably your Wi-Fi.
Yeah. I think it's a little slow. I can hear the delay.
Yeah.
And I'm actually on LTE, which is even worse.
That's actually amazing. Let's get into the book. What do you say?
All right. Well, I would say let's start with the beginning. Just overall impressions of the book, what people, I guess, thought about the book in general. Was it helpful? Was it, as we talked about it, infuriating? Was it enlightening? Did you get something out of it? I guess we could start there. I mean, that's probably the.
Should I type in or?
So let me. How about this? We should probably get off of the the phone and just type in.
All right, let's do that.
All right. Isn't that bad? All right. The wonders of technology, right? Yep. So I guess the general impressions. What did you think of the book? What did you get from Mr. Shapiro's perspective on, I guess, being African American in the U.S.? He definitely gave us a good perspective built by stats, interviews. He conducted interviews all across the U.S., mostly focused in a couple cities. But the nice part about it was, I guess I'll give mine first, was that. All right, maybe we're back on. Looks like we're back up. Lance said, first thing I realized with the books is that it's going to be a long 200 pages. It did feel long, mostly because, as my wife could probably attest, I read the book, read a few pages, got up from my seat, frustrated, mad. Um, I think there were some things in there that, I guess, as reality hit, it was tough to kind of swallow all that, to get it all, digested. It was, I guess, more reality of where I am in my family. So Lance says infuriating is probably the best word to attach to that. It was infuriating in general. So I got a couple questions we definitely want to get through. We definitely want to talk through. I think one of the main objectives for the time we have is to talk through some of the main themes. And I guess for me, it's not enough to just kind of go through the facts and, rehash every line of the book, but it's really to talk about some of the things that we can do to deal with it, improve it, to start with our generation and try to make change. Um, there's no way in the world this can be three quick things to do to increase the net worth of African Americans. That's not that wasn't the intent of the book. It's not the intent of this discussion, but maybe there's some things that we can do in our family lives and our communities to really try to help with this difference in net worth. So I have a couple questions. If you have any questions of your own, any comments of your own, make sure to type it in the comments section. But I think even if you haven't read the entire book, what you'll find is that some of the questions we have are stuff that you can kind of chime in on. So I guess one of the first ones that I had, and as Mr. Shapiro talked about middle-class families, he explained in the book that as families gain and transfer generational wealth, he said it's with the assistance of what he called transformational assets. These included cash, inheritance, and it's funny because it wasn't just inheritance at death, which, I mean, as someone who's probably not going to get a big, $100 million check at the end of any of my parents or family members dying, to get money while they're still alive and borrow against that, that was something that made me even more infuriated. But also he talked about direct asset transfers. So here's the question. Given that most of us, especially the ones here, and as he talked about, African-American families are not currently in this situation to get these type of assets, what can we do to begin to build these type of transferable assets? What can families do? And secondly, what can families do to try to ensure these assets remain and transfer from generation to generation? So I guess for me, and I'll definitely as you chime in and put your responses, I think for me, where I came out with, and this may sound a little crude, is that I think we're just going to have to take an L for one of these generations. And what I mean by that is there may be some sacrifice that one generation makes to help the next generation and the generation after that. So we talk about this a lot in books, and it's more of on a theoretical level, but the sacrifice of your ancestors led to the wealth of future generations. Well, even given that we have this terrible deficit where we don't have the money, we don't have the assets, we don't have the businesses to transfer, we're going to have to, at some point, start digging and building that foundation. And so for me, I have two sons, one's 16, one's 14. And Lance said to first acquire the assets, very important. I think I'm going to have to make it part of my goal and my plan to make sure my sons don't have the student loan debt, have a house when they start out on their way. So I may have to help them with down payment assistance. So there's some things that I may have to do that may not be in my personal interest, but I definitely have to do the things that I think will help with that generational transfer going forward. The other part of that, and this is where I get into the insurance part, let's talk about what Lance said. First step is for us to acquire the assets. So the book was helpful. There's plenty of stuff on the internet, and I think it's a great comment, but we need to get our act together. So it's talking about generations. Generation starts with us. We have to get to the point where home ownership is important for us, where having cash on hand is important to us, where delaying gratification is important to us. So much so that we start to build those assets so that when our little ones start to go into school, when they start to have families of their own, we can help out with those things. And then at the end of our lives on earth, we can't take the cash with us, so we should leave some kind of inheritance. Now, for us, it may be small because we don't have grandma and grandpa to give us 100,000. But at some point, 10,000 becomes 100, 100 becomes 1,000,000. As those steps go forward, we need to be the ones that help drive that. And it starts with us. So great point, Lance. We have to get our stuff going to make sure that happens. So the second part of it, and this is where I struggle. So, if you have any ideas about this, which is definitely important. And as I told you, I'm raising two sons of my own. So it's really important to me. But what can we do to make sure it stays there? First part is acquiring assets. Second part is to try to support future generations. But now, what are we going to do? How do we make sure that my son and his family, your daughters and their families, can transfer this one generation to the next? So it's still a point of education. It's still a point of experience that has to go with transferring assets from one to the other. And we'll talk about this a little further, but there was almost an expectation that money would be there, that this was kind of routine. And so as these families move from one step to the other, they may not have directly said it, but they almost expected mom and dad to give them some kind of money. And so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for them to get a house when they needed to. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility for their kids to go to private school because they knew mom and dad could help out in some way. I guess the unfortunate part for many of us is that we're not in that situation. Most of us have gone to school and had to pay for some of it, and had to foot the bill, if you would. I mean, whether it was through student loans, work study, getting out of school for a little while, then going back. I mean, those things were what we had to do to get through. But I think those are important to pass on so as an understanding for our kids as we go forward. They need to understand that not only money doesn't grow on trees, but that how important it is for us to go forward. Great question. How do you start building a legacy now? Oof. I guess if you don't know how far and how bad you are, I mean, you'll never be able to get any better. So are you doing an assessment? Are you taking advantage of the tools that are out there to say, where do I stand? So there's a couple books that I've been reading, and I'll start sharing those on this page, but about making a clear assessment of where you should be. Now, it's going to look ugly at first. And, there's one target where I'm supposed to be, and this is debt to capital. But I was within 10%, and I'm supposed to be somewhere near 50 based on my age and experience. But all those things are absolutely critical. So one of the other questions I had, and this is more of a general thing, but during some of the interviews, some of the respondents acknowledged the transfers of assets in their lifetime, but they seem to downplay their impact when describing their current net worth and financial assets. So the interviewer would say, has your mom and dad or grandmother and grandfather helped you? And they would absolutely say yes. They would sum from a name to the dollar. But then when they said, well, what do you attribute to your success, as a different part of the interview? Well, it was hard work and my determination and, nose to the grind and our saver's attitude and investments. So they never linked the two together to say, I had this head start here, or I had this assistance here, and that helped me get to a good foundation to be able to build upon. It was, yes, they helped us, but if you want to talk about why I was able to build this house, or why I was able to put my kids through private school when we only make $30,000, $40,000 a piece, or there's only one income, they didn't seem to make the correlation. So I guess my question is, what was your impression of these findings? I mean, have you heard this kind of explanation? Have you experienced it? I could tell you my impression, but I think one of the words that we used earlier was infuriating. And it's mostly because, one, I haven't been in that situation where, someone could just pay my down payment or anything like that. But the missing link, for people to not know how blessed they were to be able to have those two pieces, or have any of those pieces together, was what was a little unsettling, I guess is probably the way to put it. So what did you guys think? What were your impressions of that statement? Lance said one of my younger co-workers I've discussed the book was acknowledged and recognized impacts had on his life. So that's good. So here it is, someone who's had that experience, who's had that kind of help, can actually start to marry the two together. So I kind of deem myself as an optimist. So I wanted to believe that that didn't exist. I wanted to believe that people who had all of this privilege and had all of this working for them didn't forget, didn't forget that this was so important for them, and this was a good head start for them in their life, especially in their financial life. Money doesn't make you happy, but money does afford you some opportunities and freedoms that those without it cannot afford. So we talk about the school systems a lot, he talked about the school system a lot in this book, and how, there's a lot of school systems that if people had choices, they wouldn't send their kids there. But based on economic conditions of their communities, the schools aren't getting funded as well, whether it's the government's fault, whether it's taxes not being collected in the area or the county, whatever the cause is, those schools aren't the best of schools. But because you have some financial assets, some transformative assets, as he put in the book, you're able to say, well, we're going to move into this other school district for a better life for my child. And therefore, that starts the ball rolling in a different direction. So it's extremely important that people recognize that how much of an impact that has on it. And so Lance, I don't know who your coworker is, but that's a really good point. I mean, and based on what we saw in the book, that's something that wasn't necessarily the theme, which was the infuriating part. It's really important that people acknowledge that. It's a huge head start. I'm thinking if I had, just trying to put it in a personal perspective, if I had that much of a head start on my first home, which I bought just a few years out of college, so that was seen as pretty good. If I would have had a better down payment, I would have avoided PMI. I would maybe even got a bigger house, maybe not. But at that point, I would have had way more equity in the home. So when I transferred to the next home, or I've had more freedom, and there's a whole bunch of impacts that has just based on. And just thinking about that, I mean, the money that would have flowed through from one house to the other, and also in our budgets, would have been tremendous. But we still made it. We just didn't have that same opportunity. So Lance has a question for the group. Says, what is the impact of using those funds to improve their current school system versus uses those funds to put their kids in private school? Ooh, that's a hard one. That is a tough one. So in the book, Mr. Shapiro talked about that choice people made. And one of the questions I had was around that choice as well. So it's a good question. Trying to think. So I'm conflicted on it. One, the choice to move to a different school system is the much easier choice if you have the funds to do it, or putting them in private school. It solves all your problems. You move forward. There's no big deal, right? But if you look at it in a bigger spectrum, and you say, how does this impact my community? If this school is so bad, then it's got to be bad for everyone else. Then you make a different choice. And I don't want to make this a supremely black and white thing, but it may be just the way our culture was built. Maybe it's just my personal experience, so I'll yield to that bias. But in my experience, the difference that some black people or African Americans and white people make in that situation is they try to look at it as the community as a whole. They try to make decisions to try to impact the community. So there's more of a sense of community in that case, where we try to help our less fortunate and maybe all less fortunate more so than what was presented in that book. I don't think he touched on that very much, but there's a sense of community that kind of drives us to, if we have more money, try to help the school system, help the area to move forward. Now, is that everyone? Absolutely not. But to Lance's point in the commentary, the money that you pay for school systems, for private schools, a lot. The money that you pay for your student loans after you're out and you got, a ton of money going out to whatever loans is a lot. So there's a ton of stuff that would be helped by not making that particular point. So even the tax base, you got to imagine that county is not benefiting from you being in the county as well. So let's talk about that part. I mean, the book is Hidden Cost of Being African American. So he put a number on it. It was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of net worth difference. And there was also a big net asset difference. So, as you can tell, African American, I have a net worth that I can manage. I'm not going to put the number out, but it's nowhere near what some of those numbers he talked about for the median or mean numbers in the book. So, did that make you feel any certain type of way versus, the African American experience versus the white experience? Was it infuriating? So we talked about this a little bit, and I think Lance pushed his view out. But what was infuriating about that? I mean, do you feel like this is something that should be fixed, should be changed? And there's, of course, another leading question after that. But what can we do to fix it? So obviously what Shapiro was trying to push was that there is a difference. There is a measurable, significant difference in the net worth and net assets of African Americans and white Americans in this country. So now we have the numbers, we have the difference, we felt it. What can we do about it? So that's the large question that's in front of us, right? So there's this argument I have in my mind all the time about equal and equitable change. So, we've had the Women's March, and they've fought for equal pay. And so think about it as a stair step. So here you have the privileged and fortunate making this much, and here it is, I have the underprivileged, right? So in the Women's March, you had men, you had women. Let's just leave it at that for basic terms. They've been making this much more versus a woman all this time. And so you got to think their assets, their net worth has grown at a much significant clip. And then what he talked about was it's not just dollar for dollar difference. So I make 5, you make 3, we go like this. No, it's because I have the money to do things that you can't do, I take advantage of opportunities, and that exponentially starts to expand. So what if I say, all right, well, we're going to fix that across the board. Every man's going to make the same amount as every woman starting today. Remember this gap. The gap is in pay, so now we go to here on pay. But what happens if we did this chart for our assets, net assets, and for our net worth? It's probably, and I don't have enough screen for it, just adding more just makes it where we all just kind of go like that. And we never start to touch. The lines never touch. We never get to a point where we're ever equal, if that's the case. So is it ever going to feel equal? If you're looking at pay and you say, I'm making the same amount as somebody sitting next to me, probably. But if you're looking at it from the bigger picture, which he's trying in the book, he's trying to get us to look at the stuff that we can transfer from generation to generation isn't my pay. My pay is what I get when I go to work. So if I stop going there, I don't get that pay. The thing that makes a difference from generation to generation is the assets that we have that we can transfer to generation to generation. You can make the argument that I make money, I can grow assets, and I can transfer that. But again, it will never be equal in the net worth scheme if all we're doing is talking about is talking about pay in itself. It's got to be way more than that. So, good comment from Lance. Says slow process. Assets and wealth have been built over centuries. The key to closing the gap is to first know one exists. Rule number one, we got that covered. The book does do a great job. It gave us a lot of numbers to kind of back it up. Had the science behind it. There were some things in there that I didn't quite follow and didn't think that was much. But as far as things that we can do, and this is what Lance's point is, we can educate ourselves. We need to not just be aware of the difference, but in this case, we're being aware of the difference, how it was accumulated, how we got here, and then start to look at, okay, what can I do about my current situation to try to fix that? So, okay, you don't have any assets, you don't have an IRA, you don't have cash on hand. You may have a little equity in your home, which I think he said was about 50 to 60% of your net worth. Okay, so what can I do to start leveraging what I have to build to a better place? And then create plans in which to start to grow that, to start to take advantage of it. So here's the part that I would say is the hardest to do, is the creating the plan and sticking to it. How many of us have created a financial plan, a budget, said, this is all I'm going to spend. I'm not going to spend any more than this. If I get this bonus, all I'm going to do is put it on my debt and never touch it. I'm going to put it in savings and never touch it. How many of us have said that? Say it all the time, right? So one of the things that I found helpful in my plan is to try to make things automatic. I think in general, I don't even think it's a male-female thing, but my wife's a better saver than I am. I get money in pocket. I have to go to Best Buy and spend it on some gadgets, and I think I have a help group for that. But it's my weakness. So if part of the plan is to save money to put it away for a rainy day, how do I do that personally? This is my plan for my family to create more assets going forward. How do I do it? Well, I do it where it's automatic and it's in places in which it's difficult to get to. And it's also, there is a penalty for taking it out. So what do I mean by that? In my 401k, I have a 401k through my job. I put money in there. It comes out automatically out of my check. Taking it out is a long process. You got to have specific reasons for taking out hardship withdrawals. Loans are a long process. So there's a thinking about, impulse buys and stuff. So in this case, I can't do an impulse withdrawal. It's something that has a process to it. It makes it hard. And I'm pretty sure they do that on purpose because of the tax benefits and the paperwork and all that good stuff. But it takes me sticking to a plan, knowing myself and knowing what my goals are and kind of grinding to it. Is that to say that you won't spend a little money here? No, that's not the goal. And your plan shouldn't have it where it's no fun. But you got to stick to the plan and stick to the target. So it seems like Lance is also very aware and accepting of the fact that it's going to take some sacrifice. So, when we don't have it easy, you don't have Scrooge McDuck, bank vault in the back. You have to look at it as, in order for my next generation of children and their children's children and all that good stuff to have something, I have to make the sacrifice. So I have to kick this ball off. Now, I would love to live in a New York penthouse and fly over everywhere and see all the continents and go through this bucket list of places I want to travel to. It just may not happen. I may have to temper my plans, not to say to eliminate them, but to do them more within reason. So that way, when my son and my two sons come to the point of where they're buying a house, I'm helping them with some money that I had to maybe struggle a little bit to save up, but I'm giving them such a head start in their life. They'll now have a little bit more to help with their children when it comes to the point of their children buying a house, going to school, starting a business, doing things that can start to keep that ball rolling on generational wealth. It will take risk. It's not easy. It's painful. I would say, Lance, it's not one of those things that's real easy to do. What Lance said is he created multiple accounts. He allocated a paycheck by percentage or set dollar amounts. Yep, these are all good things. He has one for savings, one for bills. Okay, man, you got a lot of accounts. And spending money is the smallest account. Oh, man. Well, look, he has an account for spending, right? That's to say, hey, I want to spend at some point, and therefore I have to have this account. He has a plan, right? I mean, he knows the parts of the plan that need to happen, and he knows, how to get the money to allocate there. I actually have a Ally Financial, not making an advertisement for them, but it's an online only account. I have a debit card, but it's locked in my lockbox, and we never touch it. It gives me a good savings rate. It's accessible, so it becomes our emergency-ish savings account, and all we use it for is saving for either our emergency fund, which is we're trying to get to 6 months of salary, and then the other one is for saving for a new home. So money goes in there automatically out of the check. It's growing slowly, but it's growing. And at the point of, hey, I want to go and buy something, I can't do it because it's sitting in that account. It gives me the pause to say, this is not meant for this. If it was sitting in my dresser and I got in there one day and saw a couple $100 in there, brand new iPhones coming out, there's a temptation to touch it. So there's going to take some sacrifice, to Lance's point, and that's what we try to eliminate as far as the plan is concerned. One of the other things that, and this is back to the same question, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit, expanded just from us. So we talked about equality of resources in general. They're not enough to overcome the historical deficit, which is caused by, in the book he talked about it a good bit too, it's caused by, some of it was racism. The economic depression seems to impact the African-American community more so than others. Poor education, etc. So we recognize that. That's not, we got some facts in the book to kind of back that up, but we knew that going in. So I guess what are the things that, and as voters, as people who participate in government movements, community organizations, what are some of the tangible things that if we were asked, what could our governments do? What could our local and federal governments, what could our community organizations, what could the private businesses and enterprises, what can us as citizens do to help level the playing field with regards to these things? Education, health and safety, and economic growth for African Americans. So put yourself in the position where somebody heard your cries and said, look, this generational gap for economics is killing us. This is something that there's no way that we can move wealth from one generation to the other. There's no way that this is something that's sustainable. We're having the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But if you ask that question, they say to hear you, okay, what do we need to do? What would you tell your local government? What would you tell, I live in Richmond, Virginia. What would you tell the people in Richmond? What would you tell the people in federal? If they ever ask you, what would you tell them? What could a community organization do to help with shortening, leveling the playing field, at least getting it where it's smaller, or trying to even out the generational wealth gap? What could private enterprise do? What could Bank of America? What could Coca-Cola? What could Budweiser? What could 7-Eleven do? People or companies who make money in our communities by selling their products, by having their stores, what could they do tangibly and sustainably, hopefully, to help with the gap? So what Lance offered up was more financial education programs. Good point. One of his earlier points was to educate ourselves. So the hard part about getting better at something you're doing poorly is you don't know what you don't know. So I can say, hey, you need to get your net worth up. I can go Google it and find out what net worth is if I don't know that already. Now, the point on me, I need to be able to say, what can I do to impact the net worth? What can I do in my personal financial situation to kind of impact that long term? So, I mean, I can sit here and look at all the words that people throw around. Oh, you need to get an IRA. Oh, you need to invest. All those things mean something to someone if they know the basic stuff. But we got to think that not everyone's on the same level of financial understanding. Not everyone sees how one relates to the other. So if we're talking about finances specifically, then saying, hey, you need to increase your net worth is the high level question, but it doesn't help them on the ground level stuff with their finances as a whole. So they can't even build a plan because they don't know how to get from A, to Z, because they don't know how all the stuff in the middle impacts the other. Lance says, I believe they are going on, but you have to go into communities and reach people where they are, not where you want them to be. And this is a good point. This is really something that we as African Americans who have some education about the things that we're talking about, we said about education, health and safety, economic growth. The book talks a lot about economic stuff. We have to do better. Let's put it this way. It starts with us. We have to do better about educating, about being there, about investing, about spending, and all these things are gaining traction. The Bank Black movement is gaining traction. We can't say we're going to help the black community or we care about the black community if we're not investing in the black community, if not spending in the black community. One of the common complaints I get, well, it costs so much. I get it. But ask the question, give a retort for that. It cost me $3 more to spend in the black community. So I understand you may not have a lot of money to throw around, but would you rather give $3 more and know that it supports a black organization, a black individual owner, business owner, or spend less and it never touches anyone that looks like you? And I think we need to make more of those choices because the economics of business works so much that you have to have the scale. You have to have the people that come in and buy stuff in order to get the lower supplier prices. So it's a wheel that we have to start spinning and helping them spin by spending more with them. So if you see a local restaurant and their prices are a little bit higher for the same similar type dish or service as someplace else, it's probably because they can't get the lower prices because they're not a franchise or because they aren't, established like someone else and had the legs to negotiate. So it's up to us to try to help feed that system. So do we do it? We don't always have to do it with our dollar. We can do it with our support, our communication, our promotion of it. When someone says, "Hey, I want to go out to eat," you should be able to rattle off 5, 6 restaurants in the local area, black owned, that you can help promote. That does a lot too. One thing I noticed about other communities, whether it's the Korean community, whether it's the Chinese community, Caucasians, they promote each other and promote each other being with either communication or saying, "Hey, if you need a good dentist, you need a good anything, hey, you should go to this guy. I go to him all the time." We need to do more of that as well. We can't have the excuse that, "Well, I don't know anybody." Well, there's a wonderful thing called the internet now that if you just type in black-owned dentists in my area, Google has a way of knowing exactly all the ones that's in your area. So someone has posted about it, and we should be more informed about that kind of stuff. As far as on the education front, I think Lance gave us a good suggestion. Become more involved in the school system, regardless if you have children or not. That's a good point. There are mentoring programs. PTAs need volunteers. They need donations. They need somebody to stand at the booster table. The elementary schools they have what do they call it? Like reading buddy programs where somebody comes in during reading time and helps read to the kindergartners. You could think that there'd be a lot more of that stuff. But I think it's just a matter of awareness. People don't think about it. Hey, I don't have children. Why should that be my focus? But if there's anything that has a big impact on economics, we know education is key to that. Even in the book, if you think about it, he didn't say it in this exact way, but a lot of the families that had a lot of money had a supreme value on education. That's why they made the choices. Hey, I'm going to leave this school system. I'm going to put my kid in private school. I'm going to pay for their college education. Not just because I have the money. They could have just gave them the money for a $50,000 wedding. But what they did was they gave them money to support the educational efforts because they knew that if I'm going to invest in someone, I'm going to invest in education. So here it is. What Lance's comment is, we can also invest in our young people in our school systems and also help out our neighbors who have children, even if we don't, by volunteering and investing our time. Think about it. If you are an IT professional, there may not be an IT professional at your local high school. There may not be an IT professional at the local middle school. And I guarantee you there's probably not one at the elementary school. They probably go off of shared resources for the county. But if you could volunteer your time to help with the network, to help with teaching how to use the network and structure it and build it. There's coding programs that's happening all over the country because coding is seen as the way of the future. These are things that you could help with. Maybe you don't have children, maybe you do. But those are things that you can take your time and talents and devote it to investing in education. And especially if it's a school system that trying to put this nicely, that full well is not doing well, does not have good structure, does not have good funding. There's opportunities like that all across the country. As I guarantee you, there's a bunch of them in your city. We have them in Virginia. As good as our school systems can be, and they are in some cases. We do have, even within some of the better school systems, there are schools, individual schools that are struggling. So we do need to make sure they're helped out as best they can. So there's a couple things, and maybe we can wrap up here. One of the things I do want to talk about is next month's book. Next month's book has been selected. It's called The New Jim Crow. It's by a wonderful author named Michelle Alexander. And so on the page, I will post links to Mahogany Books. It's a black-owned bookstore that I've used. I used them for the first book, and I also used them for the second one. First book was back ordered, so we had somewhat of an issue there. But I just ordered this month's book, well, I should say May's book, and it's on its way. So it'll be here on Tuesday. They have plenty of copies. I did contact the owner, and they did say that they have plenty in stock. You can also use Amazon. And back to my point about, price. So Amazon, as we know, is a multi-billion-dollar company per month, probably. And so the price on Amazon is cheaper. Not trying to hide that. But Mahogany Books, again, is black-owned. It's a couple out of Northern Virginia. They started a bookstore. They are a great resource. Like I said, I actually talked to the owner on the phone. So when I had a question, it wasn't answered by, some group somewhere in a telemarketing center, but I actually talked to the owner, and that gave me some kind of solace, because he was very apologetic about not having the book for last month, even though it's not technically his fault. So if you need a copy, I would say go to Mahogany Books. I will list the link to their site, but it's Mahogany, just the way it's spelled, books.com, and also try Amazon.com. The book of the month will be The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. We look forward to having you on there. Also, as Lance pointed out, if you haven't read April's book, we are giving away copies. So don't let this be, well, I missed it, can't read it. That is not an excuse, and we won't let that be an excuse. We understand that some of the books we've picked you may not have in your local library, but that's also a reflection of the stuff that the libraries focus on. They focus on classic literature. They focus on general interest literature. They focus on stuff that would be good for a wider population. Makes sense, because they're trying to make sure all their constituents get copies of books that they'd be looking for. But they're not going to have 10 copies of The New Jim Crow. So even if your library is, and you're lucky enough to have one there, they're only going to have one. So what we would like you to do is buy it. If you can't buy it, borrow it. If you can't borrow it, ask us. We don't want you to not go without reading these books and following along, because we think they're really good books. Now, one of the comments we got about these first two books is that they are infuriating. I guess as we start to open our eyes to what's going on, it's important to note that, we need to be more active. We need to be more knowledgeable. I won't use the word woke, even though I just used it. But it's important that we really try to know what's going on and know what's behind stuff and do things to improve ourselves and our community. So what we're looking for in June is to do something a little more lighthearted. So we have a pinned post at the top of the page. Please put in your suggestions, maybe something that's a novel, maybe it's a Walter Mosley criminal novel, maybe something like that. Maybe it's something that's lighthearted. Maybe it's a comedian wrote a book. I don't know. Book of poems. We never know. So we are looking for stuff that may be a little more enlightening, a lighter side, inspirational, stuff like that. So if we keep picking them, I'm going to keep picking this stuff that's going to anger you. Just kidding. But we do need your suggestions, and we do want you to join in as best you can. Hey, look at that. My pastor just joined. Thank you, Reverend Albert Armstead, for joining. And again, as Lance pointed out, and I didn't want to pass over this, but I did want to leave this as something that's important. I joke around with some of my friends and coworkers that if you don't vote, you can't be my friend. I'm actually serious about that. I do my best to encourage people to vote, to participate in local, state, and federal elections. If you need a ride, I'll take you. If you need reminders, I hate doing it, but I do it. But at the same time, it's so important. The people that you are saying are making the bad decisions about schools in your area, make bad decisions about the taxes or whatever. These are the people that got elected in elections that you could have voted in. So is it something that you should be allowed to complain about? You can. Facebook doesn't say you didn't vote, so you can't complain. But trust me, it's you have a voice. Our forefathers struggled, picketed, were beaten, put in prisons, so that we could do this. We can vote, and it's so easy. They make it an easy process for you to vote. You can vote. I vote ahead of schedule most of the time because I travel a lot. You can vote absentee. Some states you can vote, at remote places. So it's very easy to vote. But know about, the candidate's stance. Find out what they really stand for. Do they stand for what you want in your communities? The things that the African American community struggles with. The things that we're reading in the books. Are these things that they would address in their time in office? So vote in every election. Great point, Lance. And with that, hey, look, I think we're getting close to time. Lance, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Reverend Albert Armstead, great pastor, First Union Baptist Church, Dill Road, Richmond, Virginia. If you're in the area, make sure you come see us. If there's anything else that anyone else wants to add, please leave a comment. If you need a book, if you know someone that really needs some encouragement to read, please post that on the page as well. We look forward to reading, again, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Reading this next month. I heard it's a really good book. I have not read it. I haven't even got my copy in hand, so I'm really looking forward to perusing the pages and sharing with you next month. We may have to do this in Hawaii next month. Try to get some luau's or something. But hey, look, thank you for joining. Spread the word, as Lance said. Let's get this moving forward. Black men do read. Black men are taking care of their communities, and black men are trying to get better. So let's do it together. Have a good night.